So again, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Clean Buildings General Q&A session hosted by the Buildings team at Department of Commerce. For our Q&A today, we have Luke Howard, our Clean Buildings technical lead. I have Annika McDonald, our incentive program manager, helping us out, and then myself, Danielle Segelby, and so here at Commerce, we strengthen communities. And for our agenda today, we are going to be answering questions previously submitted first, and then we will have a Q&A open floor. Before we get started, we will ask that questions please be submitted through the chat. Questions will be answered in the order that they were received. We will be wrapping up questions at about 11:55, and for any questions that are not answered and or require more research, we will get back to you within the next. First question, how will the Clean Buildings Act impact new construction projects being built today and in the near future?
Good question. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your participation, and thanks to those that had submitted their questions ahead of time. We got a lot of good questions and good material to go over this morning. First question. Thank you, Danielle. How will the Clean Buildings Act impact new construction projects being built today and in the near future? So the answer is the Clean Building Performance Standard provides an exemption to a compliance cycle when a building does not have a certificate of occupancy or temporary certificate of occupancy for a consecutive 12-month period within 2 years of the compliance date. So if such conditions do not exist, then compliance is required for new buildings. Additionally, the standard requires that more recently built buildings, buildings built under the 2015 Washington State Energy Code or more recently, meet an EUI target 15% less than those developed for other buildings. So to recap that, exemption does apply in some cases when the building did not have their certificate of occupancy for at least 12 consecutive months prior to the compliance date. If that condition is not met, compliance is required, and the target EUI is 15% lower than those for other existing buildings. So keep in mind that an energy management plan and operations and maintenance program requirements of the standard can be developed in the design and construction phase, and that new buildings built to current energy code should have no trouble meeting the EUIT performance metric when they are operating as intended. I'm going to post definitions in the chat for recently built buildings and the section number that references that. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you all. All right, next question, please.
Is this an exemption from the law or an extension for compliance? Assuming early adopter incentives would be off the table if exemption approved, application access, and documentation required for financial hardship exemption, submitted by James.
Okay, do you want to bring up the next question too, the related questions? I'm going to fill in some context here. So does this exemption extension impact the early adopter incentive program? So we sent out a bulletin last week which stated that Commerce had submitted for an emergency rule that would allow for early application for exemption. So Commerce recognizes that the current rules require an exemption application 1 year to 180 days prior to the scheduled compliance date leaves building owners with little time to comply through the energy use intensity target or the investment criteria performance metric in cases where the exemption application was denied by Commerce. So this emergency rule would give building owners the opportunity to submit application 3 years for exemption, application for exemption 3 years prior to the scheduled compliance date. Applicants approved could then rest assured that as long as the approved exemption status did not change prior to the compliance date, exemption would stand at the scheduled compliance date. So Commerce will provide a declaration to building owners of approved applications stating exemption status has not changed within 6 months of the building's scheduled compliance date for signature. This will serve as a final verification for exemption status. So this emergency rule is not an extension of the compliance date, but extends the period in which exemption applications can be accepted from 1 year prior to the scheduled compliance date to 3 years. The early adopter incentive program applies to buildings that meet all requirements of the standard under the EUIT performance metric prior to the compliance date and does not apply to buildings seeking compliance through exemption. The emergency rule does not affect the early adopter incentive program. Commerce is currently working on developing the exemption application process within our Clean Buildings data portal, in addition to creating guidance regarding the application process and required documentation for each specific exemption listed in Annex Z 4.1 of the standard. So stay tuned to the bulletin for status updates. These resources will be posted prior to opening of exemption applications this summer. Next question, please.
Wolford Clays gas-fired steam boiler. Advice, energy cost projections from utilities. Consider electric boiler, both gas and electric utilities, advised but unbiased. Possible loss of a gas customer. Large investment, target EUI needs to be considered. Needed by Gus.
So I will answer this question the best I can, fairly concisely. If the author of this question wants to unmute once I'm done and provide some clarification of the question, that would be advised. So compliance with the standard by meeting the EUIT does not restrict fuel selection, but compliance through the investment criteria requires implementation of an optimized bundle of energy efficiency measures. An optimized bundle is essentially a bundle of energy efficiency measures that maximize energy savings. So there may be some, one fuel may produce one energy efficiency measure attached to one fuel or another may achieve higher savings than a measure with a different fuel. So that needs to be considered through the investment criteria. I am going to put the definition of optimized bundle from the standard in the chat for you folks to peruse. Next question, unless the question needs to be clarified a little bit.
What allowances are going to be made for large indoor warm water therapy pools?
So indoor swimming pools are building activity, are listed as a specific building activity with the target within the standard, and can be incorporated into a weighted average EUIT for buildings. So if you have a building with an indoor pool, that is a building activity that's unique and can be incorporated into an area weighted target in accordance with section 7.2.3 of the standard. So it's likely that target for the swimming pool is higher than most other building activities within the standard. Next question, please.
Question maybe premature, not done enough homework yet. Looking to understand compliance for an existing 45,000 square foot building, planning partial renovation and 15,000 square feet new addition, completion by 2028. Thinking it becomes tier 1 and 60,000 square feet building needs to comply.
So yes, this building would become a tier 1 building as described upon completion of the addition. So as noted in the first question here today, the standard provides an exemption to a compliance cycle when a building does not have a certificate of occupancy or temporary certificate of occupancy for a consecutive 12-month period within 2 years of the compliance date. So in this case, this exemption may be something to consider. Next question, please.
The Heartline Betterment Organization, a 501c3 nonprofit, owns a 29,000 square foot historic red brick schoolhouse constructed circa 1922. It is on both the state and national historic registers. It is an energy efficiency nightmare. Made by Jerry.
So based on the size of the building, it would fit within the tier 2 requirements of the standard. Again, that's buildings 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. These rules have not been developed yet and will be developed through a series of stakeholder engagement workshops over the next several months, starting April 13th. The first cycle of tier 2 compliance does not include a performance metric, but will require the benchmarking as well as implementation of an energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program. Exemptions will exist as well as an incentive program. So in a case of this specific case here, we have a historic structure that appears to be an energy hog. Implementation of the benchmarking will allow you to kind of assess where your building is at, and then your implementation of the energy management plan, the operations and maintenance program in theory will help improve the energy efficiency of the building. There is no performance metric again, so you don't have to meet the target or the investment criteria for this first cycle. Commerce will be developing an early adopter incentive program to go along with the tier 2 requirements that may be useful in helping to meet the requirements of the standard. Those rules, again, are yet to be developed. So there is room for input during that rule-making session for these historic buildings. Currently, the tier 1, there is an exemption for not requiring implementation of any cost-effective energy efficiency measure in historic structures, where that measure compromises the historic integrity of the building. So that's where we're at currently. More to come in the future. Oh, and I also want to mention that there are and will be specific utility incentives and rebates that may also be useful in obtaining compliance with the standard.
Luke, we have a hand raised. I think that may want to ask additional to that question.
Great, go ahead, Tim.
Hey, Luke, Tim Hall with Department of Transportation. In the previous question, question number 6, what is the compliance date for that building? It would become a tier 1 after 2027. So is it 4 years after that in a 5-year cycle, or is it immediately? When is the compliance date for buildings that are added to tier 1 after the 2027?
Yeah, so it would be based on the the originally scheduled cycle sequence. So if the building, the addition was completed, kind of pushes it into tier 1 category. If it was completed before the initial tier 1 compliance date, so for a 60,000 square foot building, that would be 2028. So if it was completed prior to that, it would be required to comply with the standard by 2028. But again, that exemption for buildings that were recently built that may not have had a certificate of occupancy or a temporary certificate of occupancy may, for 12 consecutive months prior to compliance date, is likely eligible for the exemption for that cycle. So if they apply for that exemption and are granted that, their next compliance date would be the next cycle date. So for 2028, that would be what? 3033?
Great, thank you very much.
Looks like we lost the slideshow there. While Danielle gets that back up, I'll field question 8. The question was, how will Commerce enforce the O&M and EMP components of the standard fairly and equity? So just to give you more, the acronym O&M is Operations and Maintenance Program, EMP is the Energy Management Plan. So Commerce is currently working on developing the reporting requirements for the Energy Management Plan and the Operations and Maintenance Program. So we hope to structure the reporting requirements will encourage equitable enforcement. So these details are yet to be defined, and Commerce encourages feedback from stakeholders if you get ideas. Ultimately, it is the qualified person's responsibility to submit and verify compliance with the standard. So Commerce has also has the responsibility to assure compliance with the standard and will be implementing a yet to be developed quality assurance process. So wish I could give you a little more concreteness on that right now, but that's where we're at. And again, if anybody has thoughts about that, feel free to send them our way. All right, next question.
Next question. What are some rules that will be uniquely different to tier 2 buildings than tier 1? Many companies struggle in the tier 2 space to afford service or even get a proper equipment list. Would there be an incentive or rebate for acting now? Submitted by Austin.
Yeah, this question and others will be addressed in detail during the upcoming rulemaking sessions. So we encourage stakeholders to participate in the rulemaking process so all these concerns can be heard and addressed. There will be one thing I will want to note is there will be an incentive program implemented by the state offering 30 cents a square foot. Details of this incentive program are yet to be developed. I imagine there will be other resources available through utilities as well. But yeah, we do recognize that some of these building owners are going to have a greater financial struggle. And again, there will be and are exemptions for financial hardship.
The covered building owner elect to pay the maximum penalty in lieu of compliance. Will assessed penalties affect title to the property in any way until paid in full? Submitted by Jasper.
Okay, so compliance with the standard, as most of you probably are aware, requires building owners benchmark the buildings, implement an energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program in accordance with the standard. And for those that do not meet the energy use intensity target based upon their benchmarking, energy efficiency measures to reduce the EUI to or below the target must be pursued, or the investment or compliance to the investment criteria, the standard. So you can kind of imagine what costs that might take depending on the building size. So the investment criteria would include an energy audit and a life cycle cost analysis in accordance with Annex X of the standard, identifying all cost-effective energy efficiency measures to be implemented in order to obtain compliance. So think about those costs. All those activities have costs. There are several benefits of compliance with the standard for the building owner beyond penalty avoidance. So the maximum penalty is essentially $1 a square foot. So if we have an example of a 100,000 square foot building, that would be a maximum penalty of $100,000 plus a $5,000 base fee. So $105,000. So there are benefits beyond to compliance beyond the penalty avoidance. Those could include energy cost savings, reduce operation and maintenance costs, increase value for tenants, and increase asset and resale value, just to name a few. So keep in mind that compliance with the standard must be achieved on a 5-year cycle. So this includes fines. So every 5 years, if compliance is not met, then the fine applies. So that's kind of the best I can answer that question. It's kind of something that folks are going to have to determine on their own. For the second part of the question, we are waiting to learn more about whether assessed penalties can affect title. But I can refer you to Z 5.5.2 of the standard. It states Commerce may assign the debt to a collection agency as authorized by RCW 19.16.500, or take other action to pursue collection as authorized by law. So if referred to a collection agency, the Commerce may add a reasonable fee payable to the debtor, by the debtor, to the outstanding debt for the collection agency fee. So I will work on getting a more comprehensive answer here for this question, especially concerning the title. How will the penalties affect title? Next question, please.
Trying to understand the impact of the Clean Buildings Program on affordable multifamily housing submitted by Max.
So Tier 1 requirements do not apply to multifamily housing. So again, Tier 1 incorporates benchmarking in EMP, O&M, as well as meeting a performance metric, either the EYT or the investment criteria. As mentioned, an incentive program will be developed to assist in implementation of the Tier 2 requirements, which are the benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance program without any performance metric requirement. So input from multifamily stakeholders encouraged during the rulemaking process. So please participate and spread the word to others working in multifamily housing that may have time to participate in the stakeholder workshops for for Tier 2 rulemaking.
Well, will the state of Washington have an exemption for manufacturing? How will they look at facilities with multiple buildings if the square footage in total or each building by itself? Why are existing buildings included in this rulemaking? Submitted by John.
So this standard was promulgated by law specific to existing buildings and building complexes. So building complex is any number of buildings interconnected through conditioned space on contiguous property. So individual buildings is what the law is subject to, not a property of disconnected buildings. So Z 4.1 of the standard lists specific exemptions to the law, which does include manufacturing occupancy classifications, high hazard group H, and factory group F occupancies, as well as agricultural buildings.
And the last submitted question, what is required in the mitigation plan for the lesser penalty if a building is unable to meet requirements prior to the compliance deadline? Submitted by Kristen.
The non-compliance mitigation plan requires meeting the requirements of conditional compliance, either through the meeting the EUIT or through the investment criteria. So those specific requirements are outlined in Z. Let me reference that real quick. Z 4.4 and Z 4.5, so that's Annex Z of the standard. So this would include benchmarking, implementation of the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program, in addition to implementing energy efficiency measures identified by a national level 2 energy audit to either meet the standard, to meet the EUIT of the standard or the investment criteria of the standard. So essentially you're meeting the requirements of conditional compliance after the compliance date, and penalties will be assessed until at a daily rate until that conditional compliance is met. So in the mitigation plan, you can avoid maximum penalty by documenting that you either meet the EUIT and all the other requirements of the standard, or the requirements of conditional compliance as outlined in Z 4.4 or 4.5. 4.4 is conditional compliance through the EUIT performance metric, and Z 4.5 is conditional compliance through the investment criteria. I think that's it for the canned questions or previously submitted questions.
So now we will open, do Q&A open floor. We ask if you can please submit questions via the chat, and questions will be answered in the order received. For follow-up questions, do feel free to raise your hand if it is related to the current question that is being answered.
Okay, we have one question in the chat. Is the financial hardship exemption, if approved by Commerce, a permanent exemption, not simply an extension of date of compliance? This was my initial question, but was not clear.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you for that clarifying question, James. Exemptions are a compliance path. So if you apply and are granted an exemption for any compliance cycle, that will last for that 5-year cycle. That exemption, if it still exists for the next cycle, can be applied for again. I hope that, James, if that does not answer your question, feel free to unmute.
Yes, it does. Next question, how do I get an EUI number? I have records of energy usage.
So the standard uses the Energy Star Portfolio Manager program as the energy accounting system. So if you go to Energy Star Portfolio Manager and create an account for the building, you can either connect with the utility or utilities that serve the building, and they can automatically upload utility data to your portfolio manager account. And that program will create both an EUI for the building and a weather normalized EUI. The EUI, energy use intensity, is the number of kBTUs per square foot per year for that building. So you could do this by hand if you were curious and wanted to do that prior to creating an Energy Star portfolio manager account. You would need your cumulative 12 consecutive months of cumulative energy consumption, total energy consumption for the building in kBTU units. And then that would be the building's gross floor area is divided into that to get your kBTUs per square foot.
Next question, is there a specific reason why K-12 schools are listed under one space/use category and are not allowed to distinguish spaces like commercial kitchens as other buildings can use the ASHRAE standard?
Yeah, the targets were set based on national and regional data sets. And for K-12 schools, they were based on campus level energy use intensity. The standard in section 7.1.1 refers to using the Energy Star portfolio manager definitions in order to establish the building activity types and the different types of space uses within that category. So, for example, a building activity type of K-12 schools may include classrooms, cafeterias, gymnasiums. There are several ways you can create an EUIT for a building in accordance to 7.2.3. Ultimately is the qualified person that's responsible for developing and confirming the accuracy of targets developed. There may be cases where it's justified that a cafeteria in a school, especially if it's serving multiple buildings within a district, so it has a higher energy use intensity because it's being used more often, where it's justified to use disaggregating some of the building activities or space uses within the definition provided by Energy Star. And using the specific building activity target for that cafeteria because it has a higher use than where the source data came from. So typically a K-12 school will have a cafeteria that serves that school only. In some instances that cafeteria may serve other schools and it's justified to disaggregate that space and do a multi-use EUIT for that building. And there may be several other cases similar to that don't involve cafeterias per se, but where it's justified by the qualified person to make that judgment call. Hope that answers that question.
Okay, next question. How will Commerce determine if a building owner has an immediate and heavy financial need which cannot be satisfied from other reasonable available resources and which are caused by events that are beyond their control? Will that be subjective? Would that be subjective, or is that a set of criteria Commerce would use to determine the financial need?
That's a great question. I would have to refer you back to Z 4.1 where the exemptions are stated. We are developing guidance for the financial hardship. But there is kind of a catch-all there where, when it comes to financial hardship, we do require 2 sources of documentation. Part of that could be, financial numbers, statements, also could be, a letter from the building owner. So there is some room for specific cases for people to communicate their specific financial hardship. And we're hoping that our guidance will help guide folks most of the way, but we understand that there's going to be specific cases that we may not have all of, a list of all the specific documentation that would be accepted to document financial hardship. I don't know if anybody else from the Commerce team has any input on that question at this point. If not, okay, great. So, like I said, we're currently developing guidance for the exemption process in its entirety. And part of that will be clarifying some of the specific requirements for each of these exemptions, including financial hardship.
Thanks, Luke. Can you review metering requirements? I have one power feed that supports multiple buildings.
Yeah, so in order to create an EUI, the building subject to the standard needs to be metered appropriately. So if a building that is subject to the requirements of the standard is master metered with several other buildings, and you will not be able to create an EUI in accordance with section 5.2 of the standard. So there's 2 options. Either the owner of the building provides submetering so that they can disaggregate out the specific energy consumption of the covered building, or they can pursue compliance through the investment criteria. The investment criteria doesn't require metering. It does require an ASHRAE 2 level energy audit and implementation of all cost-effective energy efficiency measures in accordance with Annex X of the standard.
Thanks, Luke. Next question. In your response to one of the questions you stated, there is only $1 per square foot per cycle. The later question, you state that there is a daily fee. Can you explain the fees better?
Yeah, commonly we'll say there's a $1 per square foot fee for maximum penalty. So the penalty, the daily fee, the max penalty is up to 18 months of that fee, which equates to $1 per square foot per cycle. With the mitigation plan, if you are out of compliance for less time, you gain conditional compliance. That fee is a fraction of I think it's a fraction of a cent per square foot per day. This is something that will be, better addressed within probably an email or a conversation. So please feel free to submit that question as through our Com Buildings email, and I can give you a more precise explanation of how the penalty fee structure works.
Thanks, Luke. Is there any data on how much it will cost for the average facility to meet compliance?
We don't have any recorded data on that. It's going to vary greatly. And you asked for the average facility to meet compliance. Part of this first cycle will be useful in identifying that. Commerce will be creating some reports that identify some costs for compliance. The qualified person that's been working in this industry and in energy efficiency for some time may have a good idea on the average costs. But I don't feel comfortable giving that to you right now with our experience and knowledge of the implementation costs of this specific standard.
Next question, is it correct that a building that is not individually metered, 1 meter serves the campus, needs to follow the investment criteria pathway?
Yeah, if a building doesn't have the ability to create an EUI, it will not be able to meet the EUI target. And the standard requires, it does not allow for estimates for EUI development. It must be metered data. So the alternative is either compliance through exemption if eligible, or compliance through the investment criteria.
Thank you. Next one, what would be the course of compliance if the building undergoes a remodel that changes one of the existing activity types, changing the EUI target within the 12 months prior to compliance?
Well, the qualified person is required to develop the EUI target in accordance with the standard. So if that changes during the cycle or prior to compliance, that must be addressed by the qualified person. There is no specific language in the standard that deals with the changing targets within 12 months of prior to compliance. If that change in occupancy affects the EUI of the building and the EUI target of the building, but has not shown the EUI of the building is not reflected in the 12 consecutive months of data prior, or at least not fully reflected within that data. It's a great question. I think that's something that Commerce is going to have to put more thought into and see if there's a answer for that question within the rules as they're written. And if not, it may be something that we need to address.
Thank you. How will annual review and recertification of the plans be tracked? Will this be reported annually or perhaps included in the 5-year compliance submittal?
Emily, I'm not sure if you have any response to that question, or anybody else from our team.
Monica, can you repeat the question or let me know where it's at in the chat?
Sure, I'll repeat the question. How will annual review and recertification of the plans be tracked? Will this be reported annually or perhaps included in the 5-year compliance submittal?
And we're talking about the energy management plans.
Travis, I invite you to come up. I'm sorry,
Tim.
Tim, I invite you to come off mute.
Yes, the energy management plans.
Got it. Thanks, Tim. Hey, Tim.
Oh,
Thanks for
okay.
coming
I
today.
think I understand this question a little bit better now too, Emily, but so I'll give it whirl and you can fill in any gaps. So
Cool, thank you.
Commerce will not be reviewing the energy management plan on an annual basis. What we're going to require is submittal of specific reporting requirements that the energy management plan is in place. And all requirements of the standard are being met when it comes to the energy management plan or the operations and maintenance program. But, you know, as it's stated in the standard, it's the responsibility, I believe, of the energy manager to review the energy management plan on an annual basis. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Next question, is the early action incentive program still available? If so, what is the cutoff date to meet the early action? What are the incentives offered for this?
Annika, you want to answer this one?
Sure thing. So the early adopter incentive program is still open and available. We have 75 million designated for this program for early adoption of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. The incentive amount is 85 cents a square foot of gross floor area, and it's a performance-based incentive. So you receive this incentive for meeting your building's energy use intensity target. The qualification for this program is your building must be 15 EUI, energy use intensity, above its target in order to qualify for it, and the building must be over 50,000 square feet. The cutoff for the incentive program goes by building size. So as mandatory compliance deadlines approach, for the biggest buildings, the deadline is June 1st, 2026, and that's buildings 220 square feet and larger. For buildings 90 to 220, the cutoff is June 1st, 2027. And for buildings 50 to 90, the cutoff is June 1st, 2028. So we encourage you to apply, reach out to us if you're interested in the program. We can walk you through it. I posted in the chat the guidebook that provides the background and the process for applying to the incentive program. Does that answer your question, Travis? Okay. The next question is, will there be an alternative compliance option as there is with the SBTU? If so, what are the requirements?
So Travis, I'm assuming the SBTU is the Seattle Building Tune-Up Program. I believe they have like a prescriptive path as an alternative path.
Yes,
yeah.
they've filed for a couple of our buildings for the Energy Star score of 90+ with all the proper documentation. There's also like 5 or 6 different paths you could take to meet the alternative compliance to keep from having the tune-up specialists come in, you know, incur the costs and everything like that.
Yeah, there are no provisions within the Clean Buildings Performance Standard that allow for a prescriptive path like that. It's the 3 paths are exemption, meeting the EUIT, or the investment criteria, again, which is the energy audit and implementation of all cost-effective energy efficiency measures. So at this point, there is no prescriptive path.
Thank you.
That's it for the chat for now.
You know, there was a question way up top about, I think it was a clarification about the pool scenario. Let's find it here. Yeah, from Thomas. He's referring to a 40,000 gallons of 90-degree water ADA warm water therapy pool. So this body of water is warmer than the adjacent pool. So yeah, there is no specific exemption or allowance for this scenario, other than what I spoke of as far as the specific swimming pool target EY. So in this case, you may, it's possible there's buildings out there that have specific conditions that are going to raise their EUI beyond the national mean for the different building activity types. Those cases, the investment criteria may be the appropriate path to pursue if it's not reasonable to create a target for that building, or if the target is not reasonable for the use of that building.
Thanks, Luke. We do have a couple more questions that have come in. What are the minimum credentials to become a qualified person?
So there is a specific definition within the standard for a qualified person. I will read that to you, and I will also put it in the chat. So a qualified person is a person having training, expertise, and 3 years professional experience in building energy use analysis in any of the following: a licensed professional architect or engineer in the jurisdiction where the project is located, person with building operator certification, BOC, level 2 by the Northwest Energy Efficiency Counselor, a certified commissioning professional, a qualified energy auditor, a certified energy manager in current standing, certified by the Association of Energy Engineers, or an energy management professional certified by the Energy Management Association.
I dropped that in the chat too, Luke.
Thank you.
Next question. I have a school district that has 2 separate buildings, not on the same lot. It is my understanding that without central plant connection, that this would not allow them to apply as a campus. Is that correct?
So as the rules are written, and that is correct. And in fact, as the rules are written, even for a campus, whether it's a K-12 school or a university or any other kind of campus with central system, compliance is, according to the rules, is based on individual building level. However, during the upcoming Tier 2 rulemaking, we are considering to codify a path for K-12 schools and possibly other campuses that are connected through utility services to one another to comply at that campus level. I know the City of Seattle has proposed legislation for their greenhouse gas emission standard that would allow such compliance. And that would bring the rules for the Clean Building Standard a little more alignment with that proposed legislation, as well as more accurately reflect how the EUA target for K-12 schools was developed based on a campus level. So more to come on that.
We're at 11:57. I think we can take another question and then we'll wrap it up, and anything else submitted we can post after on our webpage.
Great.
Next
Yeah, and I want to, before you read the last question, I want to note that any questions that we were not able to answer in depth today, we will take those questions from the chat and we will work on them and post them. I believe in the past, Annalyn's been compiling these questions and answers in written form and submitting them to the attendees of this workshop.
Perfect. Thanks, Luke. Last question. My building site EUI is 68.1% KBTU. per square feet. National median source EUI is 228. My building is negative 32% below national comparison. Will this qualify for compliance?
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell from this information. You note though that the 68.1 EUI is site EUI. And then the national medium source EUI is 228. Source EUI will generally always be higher than site EUI. It's the EUI considering from the energy production level and not at the building level. So it's always going to be higher. So for us to really know if your building would comply, we would first need to know what the target is for the building. And then again, verify that the site EUI is 68.1. If you'd like to email us with that question specifically, we can assist you in determining that.
Right, and I think that was our last question for today. Before we end here, we just have a couple of announcements on upcoming meetings. There's a pre-rulemaking webinar, Introduction to Clean Buildings Expansion on Thursday, April 13th, 2023 from 10:30 a.m. to 12. It's going to be on Zoom. You can find the registration link on our website. And then there is a second public hearing for emergency rules, clean buildings exemption timeline on Tuesday, April 25th, 2023 from 10 to 12 and also on Zoom. The registration will also be on the webpage as well. And that, thank you all for joining today.